You had breakfast this morning. You did not think about whether it was trying to destroy you. Ancient Egyptians could not afford that luxury. The bread, the meat, the water, all slowly dismantling them. Scan the mummies. The damage sits in teeth, gut, bone, not from war, from eating. You would not last a week at a table of ancient Egypt. Let us start with bread, because bread is where this story begins, and bread is where your body would begin to fail. Every Egyptian ate bread, rich, poor, pharaoh, farmer. It made no difference. Bread was not a side dish in ancient Egypt. It was the meal. Workers on the pyramid sites received it as wages. Soldiers carried it on campaign. Priests offered it to the gods. The average Egyptian ate bread 3 times a day, every day for their entire lives. And inside almost every loaf was something that would destroy a modern set of teeth within a decade. The grain used to make Egyptian bread was ground between stones, sandstone mostly, and no matter how careful the grinder, particles of stone, grit, and sand ended up in the flour. This was not occasional contamination. It was structural. Every loaf contained abrasive material that wore against the enamel with every single bite. Egyptologists examining mummies have found teeth ground down to the pulp, not from age, not from disease, but from a lifetime of eating bread that was essentially sandpaper. Many Egyptians by the age of 35 had teeth so worn that the exposed roots were becoming infected. By 40, dental abscesses were common. By 50, if you made it that far, chewing had become a significant challenge, and that was before the ergot. Ergot is a fungus that grows on grain, particularly in damp conditions. It produces alkaloids, compounds that, when consumed, constrict blood vessels, cause burning pain in the extremities, trigger hallucinations, and in serious cases lead to gangrene of the fingers and toes. Medieval Europe knew this condition as St. Anthony's fire. Ancient Egyptians had no name for it because they had no framework to understand it. They just got sick. Their fingers went numb. They saw things that were not there. Their extremities blackened, and they had no idea that the bread they ate every morning was the cause. Your modern body, which has never encountered ergot alkaloids in any meaningful quantity, would be far less tolerant than theirs. A population that has eaten contaminated grain for generations develops some degree of adaptation. You have none. A week of Egyptian bread in a bad harvest season would leave you with symptoms your doctor, if transported back with you, would have no way of treating. Now, the meat. Egypt was not a vegetarian civilization. Beef, goat, duck, fish, all were eaten, with frequency depending on your wealth and status. The wealthy ate meat regularly. Workers ate it on festival days and as occasional rations. Everyone who ate it faced the same fundamental problem. There was no refrigeration. Temperatures in the Nile Valley regularly exceeded 35 degrees Celsius, and meat begins decomposing the moment an animal is slaughtered. The Egyptians were not careless about this. They had preservation methods: salting, drying, pickling, and fat. Archaeological evidence from workers' villages shows sophisticated food management, but sophisticated by the standards of 2500 BC is not the same as safe by the standards of modern food science. Salted meat stored in the heat still harbored bacteria. Dried fish still carried parasites. The preservation extended the window of edibility. It did not eliminate the biological reality of what was happening inside the food. Modern food safety regulations exist because we have spent 2 centuries understanding exactly what temperature, humidity, and time do to protein. Egyptian food storage operated without any of that knowledge. They preserved by experience and tradition, not by microbiology. The result was food that kept well enough that people did not immediately notice when it was making them sick, because the sickness was gradual, cumulative, and indistinguishable from the ordinary background level of illness that everyone lived with. Your digestive system is not calibrated for this. It has been shaped by a century of refrigeration, pasteurization, and food safety standards so thorough that encountering genuine bacterial contamination in food is now a rare and notable event. A meal of Egyptian salted meat from a storage jar that had been sitting in summer heat for a week would not give you a stomachache. It would put you in a medical crisis that, in 2500 BC, there was no way to resolve. Then the water. The Nile was everything. It was the source of Egypt's agricultural wealth, the highway of its trade, the foundation of its civilization, and the thing that every Egyptian drank every day. It was also, by modern standards, comprehensively contaminated. The Nile carried sediment, animal waste from the herds that drank from it and waded through it, human waste from the settlements along its banks, and the runoff from agricultural land treated with organic fertilizer. The Egyptians used filtration methods, allowing water to settle in ceramic jars, passing it through sand. And they boiled water for some purposes. But they did not boil everything they drank, and filtration removed sediment, not pathogens. The specific threat in Nile water that Egyptologists have found most consistently in mummies is schistosoma, a parasitic flatworm that lives in freshwater snails, releases larvae into the water, and penetrates human skin on contact. You do not need to drink Nile water to be infected by schistosomiasis. You need to stand in it, to wade through a flooded field, to wash clothes in it, to let children play near it. And then the larvae enter through the skin, migrate to the blood vessels around the intestines and bladder, and begin laying eggs. The eggs cause chronic inflammation, scarring of organs, and over years, organ failure. Studies of Egyptian mummies have found evidence of schistosomiasis infection rates that suggest the majority of the population carried the parasite, not occasionally, as a baseline condition, as something so normal that it was simply part of what it meant to live in Egypt. The chronic fatigue, the abdominal pain, the blood in the urine, these were not alarming symptoms in ancient Egypt. They were just life. Your immune system has never encountered schistosoma. You have no developed response to it. The infection that an ancient Egyptian carried for years, managing alongside everything else their body was dealing with, would hit your unprimed biology like a truck, and that is before we consider what else was in the water. Typhoid, hepatitis A, various species of intestinal worm, several of which have been identified in mummy tissue, giardia, dysentery bacteria. The Nile was not a single threat. It was a comprehensive catalog of every waterborne pathogen that the ancient world had developed, concentrated in one river, consumed daily by an entire civilization. Now, consider what happened when you got sick. Egyptian medicine was, by the standards of its time, genuinely impressive. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical texts in the world, contains treatments for hundreds of conditions, descriptions of the cardiovascular system, observations about parasites, and surgical techniques that demonstrate real anatomical knowledge. Egyptian physicians understood more about the human body than is sometimes credited, but they did not understand germ theory. They did not know that disease was caused by microorganisms. Their framework for illness was a mixture of practical observation, spiritual causation, and humoral thinking. When an Egyptian physician saw a patient with abdominal pain and fever, he reached for treatments that included herbal compounds, some of which had genuine pharmacological effects, alongside incantations, amulets, and substances that we would now consider ineffective at best and harmful at worst. One documented treatment for intestinal parasites involved administering a compound that included ingredients we would recognize as mildly anti-parasitic. So, the physicians were not entirely without effective tools. But for bacterial infection, for systemic parasitic disease, for the slow organ damage of chronic schistosomiasis, there was nothing. There was observation, there was care, and there was prayer. You would receive all three. None of it would be enough. Here is the thing that makes ancient Egyptian food not just dangerous, but specifically dangerous for you. The population that lived on this diet had been living on it for generations. Their gut flora was shaped by it. Their immune systems had spent entire lifetimes building responses to the specific pathogens in their environment. They were not invulnerable. The mummies show clearly that they suffered, that they were damaged, that they were lost to the world far younger than we are today. But they were adapted. The child who survived their first years of exposure to Nile water, who made it through the gauntlet of childhood illness, who built up exposure to the local parasite load. That child had a body that had been trained by the environment to cope with the environment. You have not been trained. You are, biologically speaking, a visitor with no local knowledge and no local defenses, arriving in a place where every meal is a negotiation between your untested immune system and a comprehensive array of threats it has never seen. The bread would grind your teeth and potentially poison your nervous system. The meat would introduce bacterial loads your gut has no framework to handle. The water would infect you with parasites your immune system would not recognize. And the medicine available to treat you would be the best that human knowledge in 2500 BC could offer, which is to say, genuinely caring, occasionally useful, and entirely insufficient for what you would be facing. The ancient Egyptians were not eating badly by their standards. They were eating as well as anyone on Earth at the time. They were feeding a civilization that built things we still cannot fully explain, that developed writing and mathematics and medicine and art, that lasted 3,000 years. They were also slowly being dismantled by their own food supply, and they did not know it. You would know. You would feel it from the first meal, and you would not last long enough to see the pyramids finished. Thanks for watching. If this video made you think differently about what it actually meant to live in ancient Egypt, hit the like button and subscribe. We cover history the way it actually was. Not the version with the gold and the glory, but the version with the bread and the bone damage. We will see you in the next one.